Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome back to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. This evening, I explain why I don't say much about low-priced watches on this show or any show on this channel. I'm sharing my views and answering your deepest, darkest questions about FP Journe and FP Journe watches, and I'm sharing your viewer wrist shots right here on Watches Tonight. Spare a thought for those who pay for these pixels, thewatchbox.com. It's where I buy, trade, and sell my watches. Over 3,000 pre-owned and vintage luxury watches live this instant. Again, open a different window, keep me streaming. And to buy, trade, or sell, there is a direct access email line, which is tmosso@thewatchbox.com for any questions or queries you may have, watches you see on our website or any of our social media channels. Guys, I can see you're jumping into the box right here. We've got Richard Combs from South Florida, Eddie Landsberg, active recently on our Facebook page, Edward Ledden of Sweden, Mr. No Date. We've got Patrick S. We've got Cull Obsidian, Hail Bop, Mando L. We've got Turkisher Meister from Turkey, Joe Tyson. We've got Shoria, we've got Matt Foster, Geezer, 121 Click, Bezel, Mark SBS. Hello, guys. Let's take a look at your watches before we talk about mine. Sean B. on the road with his Breitling Chronometre. By the way, how much do you love that Camaro SS1LE? That is my kind of car. Both blacked out, looking good, nicely framed. Send me your wheels and watches photos. Kevin N. and his Genesis 4.6, a very different kind of wheels and watches shot. Or I should say, Eric N., my mistake. Apologies. Glide along the Blue Ridge Parkway in his PAM 682 Luminor Submersible, the first 42mm sub. Kevin K., I got you right that time, my man. And your dog, his English setter, liking the looks of his Rolex Daytona Oyster Flex in yellow gold, licking his chops. Nice pup, awesome watch. And Craig E. raises the stakes with Swatch Pug Watch, Pug, and Rolex Oyster Quartz Day Date in white gold. I bought that Swatch Pug Watch for my sister and my mom when I was out in Singapore. That is an all-time great, awesome stuff. To see your watches, your wheels, and possibly your dog on my channel, Monday mailbag at thewatchbox.com. Send me your wrist shots. All right, question. Many questions, in fact, but first, Dennis, my own pug, because you asked. My little guy, 16 years old, here he is in, I would say, middle age, right about 7 or 8 years old. That is Dennis. You asked, and I answered. Good little dog. He's 16 now, but he still loves food. All right, you've asked another question, this time about watches, and the answer is simple. Why don't I feature inexpensive watches on the channel? And by that, generally, I mean watches priced from dozens of dollars to maybe $300. And it's a legitimate question because they're everywhere on the watch web. For 6 years, I've been recording video overviews of watches for sale at my employer, where the name has changed, but the business has remained the same and grown. And I've branched out into Instagram, which means I now have 4 valves, overhead cam, very impressive. But the bottom line is I now have 2 video platforms, and for the most part, it's all luxury watches. So why don't I extend an olive branch to those who collect those $100, $200, $300 watches? The constant refrain I hear is you would have millions more views if you reviewed cheap watches. And it's true. It's really true on the internet. A quick search for $200 Seiko draws a wall of content geared precisely toward this kind of interest. If you can go full screen with that, Sean, they'll see exactly what I mean. This kind of watch is everywhere on the internet, and it dominates search volume. It's probably second only to searches for Rolex and Apple watches. So why don't I? Well, first, there's the obvious one, and I am always amazed by how many people don't pick this up. I am not just a freestanding social media property. There's also a company behind us. There's also a business. The business model is luxury watches, and the watches that we have are priced at a higher level. So from a purely practical standpoint, my exposure, my access, and my company's interest is in the higher priced watch. So yes, we could have more social media views if we totally hammered this topic, but then again, there are more customers for $5,000 cars than there are for $200,000 cars, and I circled my favorite on this page because the rusted bug is so obviously the one you want to get of that group. But even with the potential, and let's take this volume notion into account, even with the potential to perhaps have a bigger audience and clientele, Ferrari is likely to stand pat with its volumes and its price points. You might argue that 10,000 a year is too many Ferraris, and I would agree with you, but they're not going to be making 500,000 cars. Well, I don't know. They could probably sell quite a few at this one's price, but then again, I'm not sure that's the Ferrari you want to take to the Sunset Strip. So let me know in the box, guys. Do you want to see cheap watches on the channel? I'm guessing that you don't, but you might shock me here. I know where I stand, but I want to hear where you stand. We've got Dom Perignon from Germany. We have Emily N. Will we get Tim Masso branded dust masks anytime soon? Heck, I barely have enough of these for me. I don't know about that. We've got Thomas Burnett. We've got Glenn Watkins joining from the UK. Mark S. saying Tim's dog is cool. He's a fan of Dennis. And we've got Christopher M. joining from Rhode Island. Bear Clooney says Dennis is cute. We've got a shout out, Sean B. from Temple, Texas. And Geezer, nice dog watch convo. Keep it going, guys. Send me mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com a wrist shot with your dogs. In fact, let's take a look at some of your wrist shots right now. Tarek H. shares a silver dial, IWC Portuguese chronograph, and BMW watches and wheels. The watch is from Watchbox. Thank you for trusting our company. Azam A. and his Hamilton khaki field go off-road with his Ford F-150 Raptor. The SVT Raptor, now in its second generation, big, bold, it's the airborne truck. JCS shares his vintage Rudy Meyer designed French LIP with resin case from the 1970s. Very cool vintage piece and uncommon, possibly ahead of its time too. You're right, I can see a little bit of Ichabod in that design. Ashkal P shares his Watchbox sourced Lange 1815 chronograph and pager while on the job. Yes, pagers still exist. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your analog on my digital. Okay, more to the point with the inexpensive watches. I have a lot of editorial free reign. So if I wanted to have inexpensive watches on the channel, I probably could. I could get away with it. But here's the thing. That's not where my passion for watches lies. And I would be telling a lie if I were to focus on that sort of thing. Now, I do love Casio G-Shock because the Casio G-Shock line from top to bottom has integrity. It's not trying to be anything but what it is, which is utilitarian, useful, enduring, and in its own way, a pop culture icon, but on its own terms, not someone else's. And what I find is that most other low-priced watches are designed to resemble or suggest something more expensive, which seems to me fundamentally dishonest. Especially with quartz fashion watches, there's a generic factor to the mechanics that puts me off. Inside, most of them are very similar, industrial, and built with a finite service life in mind, which means a lot of inexpensive watches are basically just consumer electronics in that regard. They're things that are designed to be used for a period and then discarded. And frankly, for just a few $100s more than, say, a $300, $400, $500 Guess or Tom Ford watch, you could have a Hamilton or a Mito, which is really a lifetime serviceable luxury product. That watch right there, for under $1,000, you can buy it for even less used. That watch has an 80-hour power reserve. It's a diving watch. It's serviceable for life. And for $1,700, you can get the chronometer version of that watch. That's a lot to get for a few $100s. And remember, we're talking fashion watch money here. That a few $100, not thousands. So none of this is to disparage the idea of seeking value in humble packages. My friends think I have comprehensive mental incapacitation because I perpetually troll Cars.com, eBay, and AutoTrader for things like 1990s Buick Rivieras, especially the supercharged model. I am so about that, and if I ever find one that looks like that in that awesomely 90s shape, mine. But, and it's a big but, even these oddball, cut-rate, old, quasi-vintage cars of mine aren't generic because the Mercedes W124 Coupe on the rival buy here, pay here used car lot across from the Buick is not interchangeable. By the way, Don Henley, Actual Miles, great songs. Wonderful artist, but it's not interchangeable with the Buick. So while these things are cheap, they are not fundamentally the same in different packages. So even though I'm hunting cheap fun, I'm still interested in the underlying machine and the distinctive features, and that is how I look at watches. For the most part, the inexpensive watches are just interchangeable. and that's why I'm not into them. And that's how I feel about watches, which is why I don't bring in anonymous MVMT, Daniel Wellington, Tom Ford, and Guess, among many others, just to fatten my volumes and add empty calories to my metrics. So guys, there are other places on YouTube and the internet for that sort of thing. You will not see them here. Let's see some of yours. No fashion watches among them. We've got Victor A. joining us from the Jersey Shore, not far from our headquarters in Philadelphia, with his Rolex GMT Master 2 Jubilee. Nice shot, good light, good framing. Well composed. Mohammadi is in Kenya with Hamilton, and this extraordinary wildebeest migration shot, my goodness, that's probably the coolest wrist shot anyone's ever sent us that didn't involve some sort of secondary machine. Really neat. Roy S. proves yet again that there is no conflict between luxury and smartwatches, as, well, frankly, he's got 2 wrists and 1 of each. I approve. Norman C. enjoys Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, with his 2001 Rolex Daytona. Very, very cool. I love the black dial Daytona from that period. It's clean, uncluttered, and yeah, I'm a little partial to the metal bezel. All right, my feelings on FP Journe. This is an interesting topic because you know FP Journe is very hot generally and at Watchbox. So since I do have editorial control of my work, let me jump into the box real quick. Now that I've tempted you and baited you, I'm going to switch and see what you guys are saying in the chat box. Okay, good evening. Checking in from Sweden, that's Nordic Monkey. Leon joining in. J-Bo Surf, that's how it's pronounced, from Adelaide, Australia, getting up earlier. Junior Johnson joining from Michigan. We've got Blue Shirt Buddha. We've got Eric Bell. We've got John B. And we've got Mr. Wrist, and he's mentioning Mito decompression timers from 1961. You guys are a deep bench. You miss nothing. And then a little bit of education for myself. PT mentions that LIP is pronounced leap in France, and that is the first time I have ever been given that gouge. As we said in the Navy, good gouge. And finally, we've got Orlogique and Nicola. Guys, welcome all. Happy to have you. Angie asking, hey Tim, 15300. So basically a 39mm automatic Royal Oak as everyday wear. Yes. I don't see any reason why not. If you don't like scratches, that would be the reason why not. Because Royal Oaks and offshores that are not made of ceramic are incredibly scratch prone. So if you're not cool with your watch showing evidence of usage, look at something else. If you want a wonderful everyday user that is surface swimmable, then I'd definitely go with the 15300, which I prefer infinitely to say what I believe and give the audience, you guys in the box right now, the true believers, a chance to ask me anything that comes to mind about Montres Journe. I've been to all of their factories in Geneva. I've spoken to the people behind the brand. I've met FP Journe several times and interviewed him. So I have a pretty good grounding to talk about this. And I want to add, moreover, no one alive has filmed more laudatory videos of FP Journe than I have. I have admiration, but not adulation, and I'll make the distinction right now. Okay, we have Matthew G saying BOC is the best, as Long Island as it gets. That is a fact, and I saw them in Westbury last year for my birthday. It was the ultimate experience. It was like seeing Bruce Springsteen at the Stone Pony. Absolutely awesome band. If you underestimate the Blue Oyster Cult, you got to give them a chance. They are probably the preeminent live heritage rock act on the scene. And then right here, we have Matthew G saying, Agents of Fortune was my first album along with Kiss Destroyer. Agents of Fortune, 1976. That was their big one. That was the one with, among others, Don't Fear the Reaper. I have to be honest, I'm a little bit of a Spectres fan, but then again, I am a Blue Oyster Cult nerd. So let's talk a little bit about FP Journe and what FP Journe does right, because I think this is where people don't realize how much I actually admire the brand. First, pros. Total integrity about production and process. FP Journe could very easily have farmed out everything from his company. He could have worked with a white label supplier to build movements. He could have worked with many companies that build cases, that build dials. He could have essentially put his name on it and said the same thing, invented and made. Would it have been a lie? Sure. Would it have also been very common in Switzerland? You better believe it. So FP Journe has taken all the money from all the years of operation since 1999, all of the investments, all of the buy-ins from groups like Chanel, and he's put it into faculties and facilities for making watches. He's brought in watchmakers of his own level to build grand complications. And throughout all of it, he's maintained, as I do, editorial control, designing every single watch, not just the mechanics, but also the look, which is very important to him. So when you buy an FP Journe watch, your money is going towards building watches. You're not going to see him pulling up in a Ferrari en route from his castle. Your money goes to the product, which is nice and uncommon. Second, honest pricing by industry standards. For example, an average brand would charge you some ridiculous premium, like $15,000 to $25,000, to get the watch in the same size in platinum rather than gold. At FP Journe, getting the platinum watch is like $3,500 premium over the gold, all of which is to say, that's almost unheard of, and I don't know why. That seems like doing right by your customers and being honest. At FP Journe, that's how stuff is priced. I'll also mention that he's largely held the line on the Chronometre Bleu. In a world where people are paying 50 grand for used CBs, Journe still charges $24,000 for the watch, which is not much more than he was charging 3 or 4 years ago. So that's remarkably responsible, and again, it keeps the faith with the people who actually get on and stay on those wait lists for the watch. Also, when you buy a gold watch with a gold movement from FP Journe, something like a reserve, just a basic Power Reserve 5-day octa, you're going to pay probably less for that than if you were buying a steel automatic Gallet micro rotor from Laurent Ferrier. So the Journe pricing is very realistic. At the top of the price point, at the top of the line, things like the new Resonance, things like the Tourbillon Vertical, prices have crept up. But for older models, he's held the line. Now, let's talk about planned obsolescence. I don't necessarily love that Journe cases year after year are the same design, but that does keep the faith with the people who have already paid the price. Why? Because that eschews planned obsolescence. Other than maybe Rolex with its oysters, no other company does this. Sure, Omega's got the Speedmaster Professional. That stays the same for a reason, but the Seamasters, the Aquaterras, other Speedmasters, all the DeVilles, the Connies, they are perpetually redesigned so that you have today's model, yesterday's model, and tomorrow's model. At Journe, the case designs and honestly the dial designs pretty much stay the same, which is a great way of phasing in new design elements without making anything yesterday's model. I'll also mention that production volumes are very disciplined at Journe. He makes between 660 and like 950 watches a year. That's not counting the Elegant, which is a different production count and a different series, but all the mechanical watches, it's going to be between about 650 and 950. In a world where he could probably sell 3 or 4 times that shows an enormous amount of integrity, discipline, and honesty. And again, it keeps the faith with the people who've already bought your watches. They don't own something depreciated by increased volumes, Ferrari. Now, I'll also mention that when I make a joke about them, they seem to take it well, which means they don't take themselves too seriously, and clearly there's a generous sense of humor and self-confidence at Journe that is vanishingly rare in the Swiss watch industry. So on that basis, I have to say there are some very understanding people working at FP Journe, and I like that. And I'll also mention that the brand still reflects the founder's values. For example, Lang und Heine, beautiful watches, but both Lang und Heine are gone. Speakmarin, Peter Speakmarin is gone. It's a name and nothing more. Roger Dubuis, he had left and lost influence long before he passed away. The brand today does not reflect his vision. It reflects designers at Richemont. Franck Muller, Franck has been gone for a generation. Chrono Swiss, Mr. Lang is gone. He is no longer with the company, or at least not steering it. Heisek, Jörg Heisek is years past gone, and of course Gerald Genta left his eponymous company in the 1990s. All of which is to say, it is surprisingly rare to find a man who is a brand and still attached to that brand. That's important, and that plays a role in choosing a Journe watch. Now, what don't I love about Journe? Let's be honest here. Let's be fair. First, Mr. Journe is not the kind of guy I would pick as a buddy. I respect him as a watchmaker where he is hugely serious, scholarly, a student of history, and of course, great at what he does. But would I want to hang out with him and like go out on the town? Probably not. There are some Journe collectors who are totally into that, and he'll absolutely indulge it. It's just not my thing. In terms of movement finish, honestly, it's a combination of mechanical and hand finishing. Unless you get into the truly high-end stuff, like the celestial complication, like the discontinued sonnery, like the minute repeater. For the most part, it's a lot like Audemars Piguet, and that's probably the closest comparison, Audemars Piguet or Moser to FP Journe. While the FP Journe watches have gold movements, they're finished in a combination of manual and mechanical means, and that helps to keep prices contained. That's one of the reasons their prices are so fair. If you're spending an extraordinary amount of time polishing, you're eventually going to have to bill the customer for it. So as long as you know what you're getting with Journe, you're getting a very nicely made watch, but not quite that Greubel Forsey, Philippe Dufour, Roger Smith level of finish. So that's something that maybe isn't always up my alley. Let's talk about case designs. Some people say that's immunity to planned obsolescence. I say that's a 1999 Journe Tourbillon, and it looks a lot like the case that's equipped on his current vertical Tourbillon, albeit in different proportions. So I wish there were a little bit more case variety at FP Journe than you get. Take note, with the Vagabondage and the Line Sport, it is different. Now, here's the other thing. There are tons of great alternatives sitting in the shadow of Journe, and this is where I find it hard to be a fanboy, because there are great things that are often the opportunity cost to unknowingly jumping at what's hot right now. This is not a problem with Journe per se, because the watches are great. It's just that the collector fraternity, and this is you and me, we often overlook the truly interesting alternatives, especially the stuff that for whatever reason isn't as well marketed. So let's talk about Greubel Forsey. Normally, you wouldn't compare Greubel Forsey to Journe because there isn't a whole lot of price overlap, but that's changing. With early FP Journe watches and what are sometimes described as vintage FP Journe watches selling for more and more money, all of a sudden some Journe watches do overlap with Greubel Forsey. And as Greubel Forsey has moved further down the I would say market into the $100,000 range with simple balance-only watches and steel watches, we've begun to see the upper echelon of Journe watches like the Chronometre Optimum, like the Tourbillon, like the new Resonance begin to overlap with new Greubel Forsey watches, not just used Greubel Forsey watches. So that watch right there, you can pick up used for about, I'd say $140,000. That's a lot less than the current Journe Tourbillon, which means you have to seriously consider them as alternatives, especially since the Journe Tourbillon is now a much larger watch since 2019. So with that on the table and this level of finish from a company that makes 100 watches a year, you really do have to consider something like Greubel Forsey to now be an emerging alternative to FP Journe, both new and used. Second, Laurent Ferrier. I mentioned them earlier. I said that their automatic in steel costs more than Journe's automatic in gold, and that's true. But this also gets to that discussion we had about manual finishing. And Laurent Ferrier movements are excruciatingly finished, and I mean real time was spent. That's one of the reasons why the watches at face value do cost a little bit more for what appears to be the same stuff. This is the double spiral Tourbillon, which came out in 2010. It was their debut product. It was absolutely lavished with praise out of the gate. And the company seems to have lost its way a little bit in recent years as the annual calendars, the Montres Journe, the Passerelle de Lille, the watches that were cool but maybe not beloved, they have begun to, I guess, maybe weigh on the reputation of Laurent Ferrier, as they haven't had a lot of huge hits since the late 2012 arrival of the Gallet Micro Rotor Automatic. But the quality of the watch that you get is still unbelievable. And if you wanted to compare a Laurent Ferrier tourbillon to a Journe tourbillon, it would be a very favorable comparison, especially from a finishing standpoint. Or if you, like me, prefer the discretion that comes with a case-back tourbillon, these are as well finished as anything from the likes of Patek Philippe or Greubel Forsey. They are that good. Let's talk about de Bethune. Now, it's not a company for everyone because the watches are extravagant. They have a Dream Watch series, but I feel like every watch they make is a Dream Watch, or at least a Grail watch. And that's very important because what you get used from de Bethune is unbelievable. What you get new is also very honestly priced. I would say their pricing in terms of what the watches cost new is probably second among independents to FP Journe. FP Journe is the most honest about pricing, but de Bethune is very close. And because they're very unusual watches, they're non-interchangeable. You don't look at some other brand's watch and say, oh, this is the equivalent of a DB28 kind of blue tourbillon. Nothing is equivalent. The quality of the finish, the materials, the design, the watchmaking, the patented proprietary innovations. All of this is outstanding, and it deserves to be considered alongside FP Journe. If not the DB28 to a Journe watch, at least the DB25, which has conventional lugs, is a little bit more normal, and from a more conservative standpoint, more approachable. Let's consider another independent, H. Moser and C. of Schaffhausen. Now, they're not that far from Journe in terms of production volume. Journe does at most about 950 watches a year. Right now, Moser is about 1,500. Moser also has a fun figurehead running the brand. Edouard Milan is an executive. He's a businessman. He's not a watchmaker, but he is live wire fun. And if you want to be on first name basis with someone who's the heart and soul, the beating heart of your watch brand, he's dedicated his life to Moser and resurrecting that brand that was refounded in 2005 but stumbled out of the gate. Today, Moser watches are reliable, innovative, beautiful, and again, with 1,500 made a year, they're rare. They express a different aesthetic sensibility than FP Journe because you can already see from that concept dial, it is the diametric opposite of FP Journe's scattering pocket watch style complications across the face of the watch. So you have to consider Moser, and also, like Journe, Moser movements are mostly mechanically finished, which means a combination of manual and mechanical finish makes the watch more attractively priced. All of this is important, as does after-sales service. Journe takes care of its customers, but so does Moser, and that's been a big upgrade under the Milan family. They've taken care of the after-sales service, the warranty repairs, and getting warranty repairs down, and making the service process transparent and speedy. And that is something to recommend it because it's surprisingly rare in Swiss watch brands. Finally, a Lange und Söhne, they're not an independent, but I still feel like they've got the spirit of an independent. Now, these guys make about 5,000 watches a year, so they're on a different scale than all the others, but the quality of what you get is uncompromising. And I have to say that between the Lange 1, the Zeitwerk, the 1815s, the Saxonia family, the Datograph in all of its forms, the Richard Lange series and its tribute to science and scientific watchmaking. These are beautiful, distinctive, unmistakably Lange watches. They could not be made by anyone else. Lange truly is the German Patek Philippe, and while it's owned by Richemont, it doesn't feel like a group brand. So do I consider it an alternative to all of the above? Absolutely. And these watches sell for a fraction of their new retail price when used. Okay, let's take a look in the box and see what you guys got. Brick Lane is saying, Baltimore Spirits joining in late. Hi, Tim from Baltimore. We've got Tariq Chaudhry. We've got Matthew G. Hey, guys, if possible, could I bother you for a not-so-potent quotation? Yes. Cool, thank you. All right. I got Bear Clooney Watches who wants me to say hi to Bunny Clooning. Okay, hi Bunny. We've got a question from John Birkland. What do you think will happen with FP Journe when Mr. Journe retires? Prices. I would say realistically, I think that it'll be just fine. I don't think there'll be an escalation or dramatic pullback. The watches are serviceable. There's nothing in an FP Journe watch that can't be serviced indefinitely. There was a prototype silicon component, and that was ultimately rejected for production. So FP Journe watches are basic watchmaking taken to a very high level. There's nothing in there, more to the point, that cannot be fabricated. So I consider Journe watches to be a safe bet in the long run. Thank you so much. I don't see him ever retiring. I think he loves watchmaking too much. I think he'll be making watches until the day his mainspring winds down. So I would say more to a point, what's going to happen to the Journe market in like a year or two when it's not super hot? Well, I do think some of the pieces bought at peak are probably going to see their values come down, but that's going to be more applicable to mass-produced watches that are recent production or still in production. If you're talking about stuff from 1999, like the subscription Tourbillon, if you're talking about any brass movement Journe, 38mm cases, steel Journe watches, if you're talking about the Ruthenium series, all of those are going to be solid long-term investments, and I would imagine if he really did retire or pass on, those would see a jump. Do I think the Chronometre Bleu will always be a $50,000 watch? Probably not, but it'll always be worth at least retail and probably quite a bit more. We have Eric Iverson saying Laurent Ferrier's new Origin Opaline looks really, really nice. I do agree it looks nice, and I like that it's not precious metal. The one thing that I don't love is that if you look on the case back, it's a little bit barren. It has the same basic movement that powers the annual calendar, and that's not quite as attractive or as intricate as the movement that's in the Tourbillon or the Gallet Micro Rotor. So while what's there is nice, it does look a little bit austere from the reverse side, and that's not germane to Laurent Ferrier watches, which is why I'm sort of so-so on the Origin Opaline. Okay, and now we have a question. The top end of FP Journe is subject to some of your earlier points. This is from Brian C. But those closer to 35,000 aren't comparable to much else. Well, I wouldn't really say that's the case. By the way, thank you to my crew for the water. We had a little bit of a mask meltdown there, right? This is what happens when you wear a mask full time at a workplace where it's mandatory. Okay, so for $35,000, you can buy a lot of cool stuff. First, there's a lot of used Moser out there. There's a lot of used Laurent Ferrier. There's also a lot of stuff that most people wouldn't consider, like Zeitwinkel. And for $35,000, you could probably get yourself into a de Bethune DB27. So at the end of the day, I think you've got a lot of options. Maybe $35,000 new doesn't appear to offer a lot of alternatives, but don't forget that you can easily get a longer one for 35 grand. You can easily buy a large number of Vacheron, Traditionnel, and Patrimony pieces, and if you want a Patek Calatrava used, you're going to have no problems picking up a 5127 or a 5107 for $35,000 with a chunk of change left over. So I wouldn't say that there's nothing comparable. There's actually a lot that's comparable, just not when purchased new. $35,000 doesn't quite get you to a steel Laurent Ferrier Gallet Micro Rotor. That costs $40,000, but you're in the ballpark. If you can find another $5 grand, then the two things do become comparable. And between a Journe watch in gold and a Ferrier watch in steel, I would actually rather have the Ferrier watch in steel, and I would pay more for it. Okay, big hello from Philly. This is Brian Brink. And he's saying, got off work early in time to watch. And then David Datura is mentioning that it's all machine finished. If we're talking about the Origin from Laurent Ferrier, it's not all machine finished, but what's there looks austere. There's not a lot of finishing, period. There's a big open and barren bridge on the Origin case back, and that's why I really don't love it for the price. I would also say, remember, Moritz Grossmann makes watches in steel. Don't underestimate them. They are an awesome brand run by a former Lange watchmaker. And if you underestimate Moritz Grossmann, then you're overlooking what is effectively, truly the German FP Journe, because the watches are finished to or above that standard. Many of them are made in base metals and thus more affordable, and they have what's possibly the best looking automatic winding caseback in the world with their caliber 106 Hamatic bumper automatic. So consider Moritz Grossmann as an alternative. And then right here, remember guys, this is all interactive. Well, we've had all manner of voice and equipment failures in the studio today, from my mask to my computer. I do want to interact with you guys and ask me anything you want about Journe. I'm not the fanboy, but I am sort of the source of gouge in-house here. All right. Then we have Benjamin Burfield saying, completely agree with having a steel Laurent Ferrier rather than a precious metal FP Journe. And bump. What's your view on the new FP Journe Tourbillon Vertical? That is from PI. I think it's too big. Honestly, it's a very expensive watch. So for hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's plural hundreds of thousands of dollars, I would have preferred if the watch stayed thinner. I understand why Mr. Journe did what he did, because with the Tourbillon Vertical, no matter how it sits on your table at night, and he basically says half the day the watch is going to sit stationary. So if it's on its side, crown side, non-crown side, if it's dial down, if it's dial up, the vertical tourbillon is always in the same orientation as it turns. So it's always canceling out the deviation effects of gravity like a pocket watch tourbillon, and that makes sense. The problem With the Remontoir d'Égalité from 1999, the constant force spring, Journe's tourbillon is effectively secondary to the timing influence of the Remontoir. So it's the constant force to the escapement rather than orientation with respect to gravity that was always the key to Journe's tourbillon running accurately. So the vertical tourbillon is really just there, if we're honest, to look cool, which it does, but it also makes for a thicker watch. Previously, Journe watches were very fine and thin, and I always admired just how much he packed into a thin case. Today, that's not really the case with the vertical tourbillon, even as he's mostly held the line on the other models. If you're okay with the thickness of it, there's no issues. If you want a thin FP Journe, buy one of the previous tourbillon models. Then we have a question from Andrew. How important are the subscription resonance pieces versus the subscription tourbillon in the history of FP Journe? I would say realistically, either one is getting to be a name your price kind of watch, especially when they're consigned to auction. They continuously set numbers that no one would have previously anticipated. So while they're not as well known as the subscription tourbillon watches, I think the secret's out. And for the kind of guy who's into that thing, he's going to have someone give him a heads up if such a watch comes to market, and we're pretty much going to see a new mark set every time one of those things does go to auction, and I do believe auction is how they will continue to sell. Okay, then we have a comment from Brick Lane saying, I think it's a comment on, I don't quite understand your question. If you could rephrase it, I think you're talking about residual prices. And then we have a question from A Toast. What do you want in the future from FP Journe watches? I would want a more highly water-resistant mechanical sports watch. Right now, it's no secret that the most water-resistant watch in the Journe catalog is the Elegant with the screw-down crown, which means that the most water-resistant and swimmable watch in the Journe catalog is a quartz. I have no problem with that. The problem is the mechanical sports watches are all rated to 30 meters, which I don't consider safe for swimming. So I would, if not a dive watch, I would like to see a Journe watch that is, 100 meters water resistant with a proper screw down crown and no should I, shouldn't I kind of tergiversation about whether I should swim with my watch. If you buy a sports watch for $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, you should be able to swim with it, and that's what I'd like to see from FP Journe. I would also like to see the tourbillon lineup expand. I would like to see a thin tourbillon back in the lineup, maybe as a heritage movement. Bring it back in a different case shape, or issue it as a limited run in titanium or steel. Do something special, but have that original tourbillon continuously available and maybe keep the vertical tourbillon as the flagship of the tourbillon range, but not the only offering. Going from $100,000 just a few years ago for a Journe tourbillon to over $200,000 is a huge step, and I think there's a gap. There's space for a less expensive, not cheap, but less expensive tourbillon in the collection. Okay, and then Mark S. agrees with me on the swimmable Journe. I think that's well past time. I would be shocked if they don't have something under development. And then we have Zahuahada saying that there are still some Journe models that can be bought from the boutiques. Which among those would you choose in the 30 to 40K range? Honestly, in the 30 to 40K range, I would be looking at something with a moon phase, because you're going to be looking at one of the basic automatics, or you're going to be looking at the Chronometre Souverain. I like the Chronometre Souverain black label, so that would probably be at the head of my choices for something that's kind of at the entry level for a Journe mechanical, or I would want to get something with a moon phase. So I would look along those lines. You're not going to get a major complication from Journe for that money, but you could get a moon phase. You're going to get a long power reserve. And personally, I might go for a manual wind watch just because I like interacting with my watch. I like that daily ritual of winding it. It's the only time when I feel like my energy and the watch's energy are one. And that's very personal. So I'd probably go with a Chronometre Souverain black label or some sort of rose gold moon phase. And then right here, we have a question. Is the Patek 5222A a good investment, given that there are only 600 out there? I actually think 600 for a steel Patek Pilot watch is a lot of watches. That watch was released in 2017 for the New York Grand Exhibition. It was the Calatrava Pilot with basically 3 hands and no date, which is incredibly rare for a 324 powered Calatrava. It's a nice watch, but they're definitely available. Again, 600 was probably, I would say, 3 times as many as Patek should have made if they wanted that to be an exclusive piece. They're available and constantly so. Bump, bump, bump. We have a question from Andrew. What do you think of the FP Journe Retropont? I would say the FP Journe Retropont is cool in its platinum form. I'm not really into the titanium and rose gold version. I do think the platinum one with the blue mauve dial is extraordinarily attractive. It's now available without rubber bumpers, which is probably better looking but less durable. I have a kinship with that watch because I saw it in development when it was just a CAD CAM file, and I thought it was cool then, but on the wrist, I prefer the old 42mm cases. And if I were to buy a Journe chrono, it'd probably be the original Octa chrono or a black label Sontograph. Okay. Matt Parker, Tim, as someone who deals in watches and is an avid watch enthusiast, have you ever paid over MSRP for a watch, and would you? No, I haven't. Would I? Probably not. Unless we're talking about getting like a $3,000 watch for $3,200 and I've really just got to have it. I can't see myself ever paying over list for something that has a 300-year service life and will be used and available within 18 months. That's just my philosophy. Although, I have a different philosophy toward cars. If it's some weird boutique thing or a delicate, flighty, flaky thing like a Lotus that has to be under warranty, then I'd probably buy new and I'd probably pay list. Bump, bump, bump. I have to say, I like the Journe watches overall, but we have a question about Lange. What do you think about the Algonzona Odysseus? How will it perform in the secondhand market? I expect that one to romp on the secondary market for about 12 months after release. Then I expect to start seeing them available first at list and then below list. If Lange has two problems, it's one, marketing, and two, production volumes, and I don't expect the Odysseus in the long term to be an exception to that. All right. Questions about Journe. Do you guys have more questions about FP Journe before we fold? Question from Eddie Landsberg. What's the next big purchase, car or watch? Almost certainly, I'd say probably a car. I'm a car guy. Question, Dave G. What watch has disappointed you the most, Tim? That's a really good question, and I would say it's probably the Girard-Perregaux Laureato Absolute collection from last year. It was a weird Audemars Piguet Royal Oak knockoff about 15 years too late from Girard-Perregaux, a struggling brand that was once truly great. So to see Girard-Perregaux reduced to trying to launch a Royal Oak Offshore Big Bang knockoff this late in the game in 2019 last year, it was just a little bit sad, and it was deeply disappointing to see that from them. Their complications are still wonderful. I'm a fan of the Laureato. They make gorgeous movements, and they are still an integrated manufacturer. But that collection was just completely tone deaf. All right. And we have David DeTora saying, I love Lange, but not the Odysseus. Mark S. saying, thank you for the generous time tonight with the show. Really enjoying it. Mark, this one was for you. I know you didn't like the show last week. I wanted to one-up myself, at least by a small margin, to make up for that. I didn't think that was a great show either. So hopefully we're rocking tonight. Mark S. Tim, does FP Journe think the Duomet is too thick? Yes, I wore my favorite and best watch to dinner with him at his restaurant in Geneva, and he mentioned to me offhand that the watch was too thick. He was otherwise complimentary of the watch. He said it was beautiful, wonderfully engineered, and a lovely tribute to Victorin Piguet movements from the 19th century, but he said at the end of the day, it's just too thick. And then right here, Andrew, is the FP Journe Black Label Optimum still your favorite? Yes, but it's co-favorite. I have fallen deeply in love with the Holland & Holland, which is the two-hand Damascus steel gun barrel dial 39mm steel watch. It's basically a Chronometre Bleu in steel with a two-hand dial made of brown Damascus steel cut from a Holland & Holland gun barrel. I love that watch. The Optimum, to me, is a triumph of the intellect. It's the most accurate mechanical watch FP Journe knows how to make, whereas the Holland & Holland, to me, is a triumph of aesthetic sensibility. It's a weird co-branding that actually works. So those are my two favorite. And then right here, Matthew G saying, I probably sound like a broken record, but I absolutely love the Lange Odysseus. Chunky bracelet included. I think it is a serious sleeper watch that will become a future classic. There are classics, and then there are investments. A classic is a 1990s Buick Riviera supercharged. An investment is a 1990s Porsche 993 Turbo. Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I got one more round of wrist shots. Let's hit them. Cameron T. spends a day on the water with Yamaha and Corum Admiral's Cup AC1 Tides. Richard W. makes the most of life with cold Omega Steel and cold Heineken beer. Phil E. and his Bulova enjoy Corvette performance this summer, and I'm seriously jealous. A C5 Z06 would be at the top of my shopping list. Conrad and his Porsche 911, a 992, because I know you'd ask, are on the road with a summary strap for his Rolex Daytona. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. Thanks to my live studio audience and caterer, Josh in the corner. Thank you to Sean, who got me up and running with the computer minutes after mine failed just before the show. And thanks to all of you who joined in. You made this night a great one. Time out, Tim out, stay safe, stay healthy, buy a better mask than I did, and thanks for lying on.